again. Okay, got it. Okay. She made me co-host. Let's see. Just curious. Okay. Tiferet there? Tiferet?
Oh. Oh, shit.
Okay. Waiting to be made co-host. I wanted to do some reading with you this evening, but let's just get right into it. First of all, good to see you all. We had a sort of a shorter amount of reading for this session. What is important about the 4 readings is, first of all, in Hebrew, so I wanted to do the Hebrew with you, but I'm sort of waiting to see if I've been made co-host so I can do some screen sharing with you, but I don't think that's the case, but let's see. Can you see that?
No.
No. Okay. So I'm going to see how to get that into screen share. Okay, I can see you guys, but you can't see me.
We see you. We just don't see.
Okay, good. All right, I'm going to have to figure this out at another time. So basically, chapter 9, where we're up to now, it uses in Hebrew the word chesed, an interesting word, right? Chesed, loving kindness. The word is used repeatedly. In the first story, of course, if you recall, I hope you recall it, if you read it, he has this sort of questioning about what's left of King Saul's family. In very interesting, and a person comes to him and says, a guy named Tzviya comes and says that there is a grandson of Jehonatan, of Jonathan, who he promised to Jonathan, right, that he would basically take care of Jonathan's progeny, and this fellow is lame. He's lame. He can't walk, and he's brought by his servants to David, and David says to him, "Look, I want you to be able to be taken care of for the rest of your life. So I'm going to offer you a place at my table, and you'll be able to eat anytime you need to. And I will also have your servants, his sons, and others that he employs start to work your land to produce produce that will support you." So we get this act of chesed, and I'm bringing that up because ultimately people have asked me, well, what do we get out of David? What does David have to offer us? Well, one of his qualities is chesed. Is chesed is that his capacity to still, if you will, offer things up to others. Whether it's loving kindness, I would say chesed is more like a good deed. I wouldn't go as far as loving kindness. I don't think that's the extent of it. And then the second chapter, I'm going to go through a little quick and then come back. The second chapter, 10, talks about another act of chesed that he has. The king of the Ammonites. By the way, the Ammonites are where Jordan is, Transjordan. The capital of Jordan in Hebrew is Rabat Ammon. And if you look at the text we've been reading, it's always Rabbah. Rabbah of Ammon, Rabat Ammon, Amman, which is in as we say in English. So he offers condolences and sends some messengers to the son of Nachash. His name is Hanun. Notice that the name Nachash is even a strange name because in Hebrew it means
snake.
Not exactly necessarily a positive thing with them. And he then the son, who now doesn't want to carry on the fealty that his father had to David, these ambassadors who are coming to comfort him and attend the funeral are attacked and embarrassed, and it's sort of comical in a way. He cuts off half their beards, one side of their beards, and he cuts their pants, which would then expose them, particularly their genitalia, as a sign of to embarrass them. They return to David, and David's a little taken aback by it, as you can imagine. And an act of chesed. What's his act of chesed there? He doesn't immediately go into war. He says, "Why don't you go down and take a little bit of a rest in Jericho, which is on the Dead Sea. Probably they had a spa down there, a lot of spas on the Dead Sea even today, right? And let your beards grow back and get a couple of new pairs of pants. You'll be all right. So he basically has an act of chesed. He cares about these people's appearance and their humiliation. He tries to assuage it as much as he can. But then he goes to war, and there's always war, right? In the case of this war, he himself goes out to the field. Later, in the other battles we will read about, he sends Yoav. Yoav is general. And here there's also a very interesting kind of tactical kind of interest. There's now the Ammonites have hired mercenaries, Syrians or other Arameans, right? Aram was where Syria is today. He's hired mercenaries, and they're going to set up a pincer movement, some from this side and some from that side. But ultimately, with Yoav and his large forces, I mean, the numbers that are given are gigantic numbers, 40,000. That sounds a little bit overblown, but even if it was 4,000, which is possible, the Ammonites don't want to fight and they disperse. And also he criticizes Yoav a bit for fighting and trying to attack a walled fortress. As all of you know, walled fortresses are hard because people on top can pour boiling oil on you. And in one case, they mention here, a woman could drop a rock on the guy's head and kill him. So he sort of criticizes him for even attempting that kind of assault. And then in chapter 11 and 12, we get perhaps the change in the whole story. This is where the plot turns. This is where David changes to a certain degree. And this, of course, is the story of David and Bathsheba. And I don't know if you read it. What is interesting, I'm going to read a little bit of it because the language is very important here in the style of the chapters. There's a lot of very truncated words, very short messages, not long dialogues, not long discussions. And I'm just going to read a little bit from chapter 11. If you have the text in front of you, that's fine. What I had wanted to do, which I couldn't do, is to bring up Sepharia so we could read it together. So I will figure out how to do that. I have to find a 3-year-old who could help me. Anybody over 12 has problems with it a little bit. So chapter 11, I'm reading. And if you want to follow, you can go to Sepharia, by the way. Go to Sepharia if you want to follow. Go to chapter 9. And when it gives you a choice of translations, you want the Shaken Bible, that's the Everett Fox translation. But whatever translation is there is fine. Okay, here we get it. The plot will thicken. Now, again, that story ended, right? The Arameans were killed. They took 700 charioteers and 40,000 horsemen. And the commander was struck down, and he died. When all the kings who were his servants saw that what had happened, they made peace with Israel, and they served them. And the Arameans were afraid to continue trying to deliver the children of Ammon, and they no longer were working for the Ammonites. End of chapter 10. Now it changed. Now it was at the turning of the year, at the time of the kings going forth, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all of Israel, and they wrought ruin to the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. Here he stays in Jerusalem, while David stayed in Jerusalem. So he's now at another place. He's no longer the David that the crowds were singing about, singing his praises because of his marvelous success in battle. Now he has others doing the work. And this is really the beginning of that change in him. He's now has agents doing the work for him. He no longer. Now, you might say because he's older now, that's quite possible. Or he basically realizes he can get more done by sending others to do his bidding. Now, here we get an interesting detail, okay? And it was around the time of sunset. Why that's necessary or not, don't know, but it was around the time of sunset. that David arose from his lying place and went for a walk upon the roof of the king's house. And he saw a woman washing herself from on the roof, and the woman was exceedingly fair to look at. David sent, again, he now sends, remember that? He sends, he no longer does it himself. He says, he sent and asked after the woman. And they said, isn't this Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? David sent messengers, and he had her brought. She came to him, and he lay with her. That's it. Wow, a lot of action there, right? In few words, very succinct, few words. She came to him, and he lay with her. Doesn't seem like they had a major conversation. What happened after, I don't know if they had a smoke or two, but I'm not sure. But the bottom line is there's no major dialogue going on here at all. And she had came, and now to make it a little bit kosher, not much kosher, she had just been to the mikveh. She had just bathed. She's been to the mikveh. So she was purified herself from her state of tumah, and then she returned to her house. So after he lays with her, she goes to the mikveh. Interesting. Very interesting. The woman, and then you get this 4 words that change everything. The woman became pregnant. Okay. Now there's an issue. Now there's a problem. And the woman became pregnant. She sent and had it told to David. And guess what she said? These 3 words. I am pregnant. And David sent word to Yoav. And he's a real strange guy, David, here at this point. He wants to save his ass, basically, from doing something that clearly, in the eyes of everybody, was forbidden. So he sends his word to Yoav, the general, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Yoav sent Uriah to David. And when Uriah came to him, David inquired after the well-being of Yoav, the well-being of the fighting people, the well-being of the battle. He begins to talk about the army. He doesn't talk about anything around. He works around. He talks about how are things going, etc. And then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and after him went out a portion from the king. But Uriah lay down at the entrance to the king's house with all the other servants. He did not go down to his house. And they told David, saying, Uriah has not gone down to his house. And he said to Uriah, isn't it from a long journey that you have come? Why haven't you gone to your house? And Uriah said to David, well, the Aron HaKodesh, the Kafir in Israel and Judah, are standing at Sukkot, the place of battle. My lord Yoav and my lord's servants are camping on the surface of the open field. And I should come into my house to eat and drink and to lie with my wife? As you live, as your very being lives, where were I to do this thing? I mean, he feels insulted. He's a soldier. He doesn't look for a way to break from his very strong martial ways. And then David says, no, stay here. Tomorrow I'll send you back. Stick around. So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem on that day. Now on the morrow, David had him called, and he ate and drank in his presence, and he made him drunk. He made him intoxicated. And he went out at sunset again to lie down in his lying place with the Lord's servants, but to his house he did not go. Why is it so important for David that Uriah goes to his house? Because
he wants to make it seem like
has sex with Bathsheba, he can always say the babies was Uriah's.
He wants to
Get off the hook.
Pardon?
He wants to get off the hook.
Yeah.
Right? It's simple as that. But the guy's a really tough guy. He says, no, I'll sleep on the floor. It's okay. So he invites him again, and he gets him drunk. But it still doesn't matter. In the morning, he was basically still not going to be with his wife. So here we get a little bit of Don Corleone kind of stuff here, okay? a little bit of a mob mentality. So it was in the morning that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by hand of Uriah. He said, take this letter and bring it when you go back to Joab, who's the commander. And in his letter saying, don't open it. He sort of assumed you don't open it. It was sealed. So he gave a sealed letter. And in the letter, he said, put Uriah right at the front of the battle, the strongest point, and turn back behind him so that he is struck down and dies. And so it was. When Joab had observed the city, that he placed Uriah at the place where he knew there would be men of valor, and when the men of the city went out to do battle with Joab, there fell some of the fighting people of David's servants, and there also died Uriah the Hittite. So Joab sent and had David told all the details of the battle, and he charged the messenger, saying, when you have finished reporting everything about the battle to the king, it will be, if the king's anger starts up and he says to you, why did you draw near the city to do battle? Didn't you know that they would shoot down from the wall? Who struck down Avimelech, son of Yeruboshet? Wasn't it a woman who threw a riding millstone from the wall? And so he died at Tevetz. For what reason did you approach the wall? Then you are to say, also your servant Uriah the Hittite died. So again, he wants to put Uriah the Hittite's death as part of the military operation. The messenger went off. He came and told David all that Joab had said to him. And the messenger said to David, indeed, the men were mightier than we. They went out at us in an open field. We were upon them at the entrance of the gate, but the shooters shot down at your servants from on the wall. So they died, some of the king's servants, and also your servant Uriah the Hittite died. David said to the messenger, say thus to Joab, don't let this thing be evil in your eyes, for like this and like that the sword devours. Strengthen your battle against the city and destroy it, and you strengthen him. When Uriah's wife heard, and notice he's still called here Uriah's wife. Just keep that in mind. We know her name. We know who she is. We know who her father was. But she's still, in a sense, Uriah's wife. That's her identity. When she heard that her husband was dead, she beat the breast for her Lord. But when the mourning period was past, David sent and had her brought to his house. She became his wife, and she bore him a son. But the thing that David has done was evil in the eyes of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Okay. Notice how terse everything is. Everything just happens 1, 2, 3. But it's also interesting that, keep in mind, Joab, the general, has a sealed note from Shlomo, from David, saying, this is what you should do. And that can be used, if you think about it, if there's a plot going here, he can use it as insurance. Well, it wasn't, you told me to do this. It's right here in writing. But the thing that David has done was evil in the eyes of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. And what did he do? Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh sent his prophet Nathan to David. He came to him and said to him, and gives him a mashal, a parable. And it's a really tough one. He says, there were 2 men in a certain town, one rich and one poor. The rich one had flocks and herds exceedingly many, while the poor one had nothing at all except one little lamb, which he had bought, and he kept it alive, and it grew up with him, together with his children. And from his morsel it would eat, and from its cup it would drink. In his bosom it would lie. It became to him like a daughter, a bat. And there came a journey goer to the rich man. And he thought it a pity to take from the flocks or from his herds to make something ready for the wayfarer who had come to him. So he took the poor man's lamb and made it ready for the man who had come to him. Okay, kind of obvious, but it's a very cruel mashal, a very cruel parable. And guess what? It gets David angry because he knows exactly what's being said here. And David's anger flared up against the man exceedingly, and he said to Nathan, as God lives, indeed a son of death is the man who does this. He acts as if Yes, it's a horrible thing that guy did. That guy deserves to die. Okay. He's talking, of course, as if it's a story outside of himself. And for the lamb, he should pay fourfold because he did this thing. And since he had no pity, and Nathan says to David, you are the man. Taha'ish, you are the man. Thus says Yudevaphe, the God of Israel, I myself anointed you king over Israel. I myself rescued you from the hand of Saul. I gave you the house of your Lord and the women of your Lord into your bosom. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah, and as if they were too little, I would have added yet this and that to you. Why have you despised the word of Yudevaphe to do what is evil in my eyes? Uriah the Hittite, you were struck down by the sword. His wife you have taken for as a wife. Him you have killed by the sword of the children of Ammon. So now comes the comeuppance. So now, he says, for the sword shall not depart from your house for all ages, because you despised me. And this is Natan, of course, talking as the prophet of God, and took the wife of Uriah to be a wife for you. Thus says Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, here I will raise up against you a person, evil from your house. I will take away your women from before your eyes. I will give them to your fellow, and he will lie with your wives under the eyes of this son. S-U-N. For you did it in secret, but I will do this thing in front of all of Israel, in front of the son, S-U-N. And then we get this very, very famous line, which is critical to understanding the pivot in the story. And David said to Natan, Chatati Ladonai, I have sinned. This act of saying it for a person with the kind of grand sense of himself that David has is quite remarkable. And Natan said to David, Yah Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh himself has transferred your sin. You will not die. Nevertheless, because you have scorned Yah's enemies by doing this thing, the son himself who was born to you, he must die. Yes, die. Very dramatic. Very dramatic. And Nathan went back to his house. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh smote the child that Uriah's wife had born to David, so that he became ill. And David besought God on behalf of the boy, and David fasted a fast. Whenever he came home, he would spend the night lying on the ground, and the elders of his house arose about him to raise him up from the ground, but he was unwilling and would not take food with them. And now it was on the seventh day that the child died. And David's servants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they said, here, while the child was alive, we spoke to him, and he did not hearken to our voice. But how we can say this to him, the child is dead, he might react and do something evil. When David saw that his servants were whispering among themselves, David understood that the child was dead. And David said to his servants, is the child dead? And they said, he is dead. It's terse dialogue, very terse. No expansiveness here. It's all very tight, which is what the situation is, a very tight situation. Then David arose from the ground. He washed, anointed himself, changed his clothes. He came into the house of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and prostrated himself. Then he came back to his house and requested that they put food before him, and he ate. And the servant said to him, what kind of thing is this that you have done? For the sake of the living child, you fasted and wept. But now the child is dead, you arise and eat food? He said, as long as the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. For I said to myself, who knows? Perhaps Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh will be gracious to me and the child will live. But now he is dead. Why should I fast? Can I make him return again? I may go to him, but he will not return to me. Meaning I will die and go, but he will not to me. And David comforted Bathsheba, his wife. He came to her and lay with her. And look how quick this all happens. He came to her and lay with her. She bore a son and called him Shlomo, his peace. But Yod-Heh-Vav loved him, and he had a message sent by the hand of Natan, the prophet. and says God is going to call this boy Yedidia, the beloved of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the beloved of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Okay, that's the story. And it's quite interesting that the story just immediately stops. It's all very wrapped up very quickly, and then goes back to a description of various battles, and thus ends chapter 12. Okay, you all know the story in some way or another, but I think what it really shows is that David remains and becomes very cynical kind of person. And even in this tragic situation, he also remains a bit above it all. You know, the child is dead, he can't come back, I might as well have lunch. You know, seems a little bit. On the other hand, our tradition is today, when a person is mourning should not abstain from food. On the contrary, you ever been to a shiva?
Yes, of course.
So you get inundated with food. Our way of saying is, you know, we want to make sure you have a lot to eat, right? That may not be the case before the death of someone. As you're waiting for that to happen, you might indeed find yourself pushing away comforts. So he changes. It took this very tragic event, in a way, for him to change, and he will, in a sense, be given his comeuppance in the next assignment you will get for next week. I don't want to give it away, but he's now reached a place of being at the pinnacle of his power, and yet he has this predilection of being a self-centered, narcissistic kind of guy, and it becomes his downfall. And as Nathan the prophet says, you will always be involved in battle. Things will never become peaceful for you. And that's why ultimately, as we will read, you will not build the house of God. Shlomo will. You won't.
You will not build the house of what?
God, the temple. You know, but that was his big goal, was to take the traveling shrine and build a structure for it, so it would be centralized in his capital, so people would have to come to him. Right? That's the way you centralize certain things. Remember, the temple was far more than just a place of worship. A temple in the ancient days was where the exchequer was, where the courts were, etc. It was an institution. He wanted to build this national institution to bolster up his consolidation and the creation of the kingdom of Israel. Comments, questions?
No comment. There's no discussion of Bathsheba.
Ed, we do get a sense here that he does something morally reprehensible, and he's gets
away with it.
He doesn't get away with it in the way. I mean, he does if he doesn't. I mean, he gets away with it because, you know, he's the king. You know, as Mel Brooks said, it's good to be the king. But
so there's no sense of Bathsheba's reaction to her first child dying, and the fact that, you know, then
he comforts her, so we know she's in a place of mourning. But then immediately, it's like you know, when her mourning ended, I don't know how long mourning was. Was it 7 days? Was it 30 days? Whatever it is, they decide to have another child.
They or he?
Yeah, right. I think she too, because she had no children from Uriah. That's another thing that which is often overlooked. She was not a mother of a household. She must have been quite young. David's already more middle-aged, but she must have been quite young, and she had no children of her own. And look, we don't know how her relationship with Uriah was. We don't know that. I'm a little given a hint by the fact that he sent back for R&R, right, the furlough, and he winds up sleeping on the floor with the servants of David rather than going down to his wife. Maybe there was a problem there. I mean, I can't talk into it too much, but it's kind of interesting, right? Wouldn't that be the first place you would go, is go home, eat, drink, and be merry, right, with your wife? He doesn't do it. So that leads to all kinds of questions that are yet to be answered. Yes, Ken, and then Diane.
So I guess I don't read this story and some of the preceding stories as being a sudden change in David's personality. It seems to me he's always been a bit of a knave, a bit of a scoundrel. He's been in battle. He's killed a lot of innocent, women and children and all those kind of things. He's the one, if I recall this correctly, he's the one that said, I want that woman to be part of my harem. And so then he took a wife of this poor guy who then, walked after her carriage or something, was walking after her. And Joab said, no, go back home. So he did that even before the Bathsheba story. I just see him as having, not going through a huge personality change, but being a very complicated, but in some ways very immoral individual. I mean, he had a lot of power. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that's part of the story about David. But yeah, I don't know that he had some miraculous change. It seemed to me that it was always in him. I mean, people don't just go from good to evil overnight. I mean, there's always a.
I'm not saying he's becoming good. I'm just saying that what he's doing is very rare with people in power, and he's saying, I was wrong. You may know a few people like that around.
Well, there's somebody that has refused to say that until he was forced to say it. Yes. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. There are many people who, in that level of power, never think whatever they did was wrong. Right? Everything was right because they did it. That's the self-centeredness. Yeah, I don't want to be over dramatic, but I do say from now on we're going to see that everything that he's built is going to start somehow, in some ways, to crumble. You'll see it when we go on to chapter 13 and on. You'll see the beginning of the rebellions against him by his sons. Interesting, which is not an uncommon thing when you have somebody who he feels has gotten somehow more vulnerable by all this. Did everybody know about this? I don't know, but the threat of Natan was, yeah, no one knows about this, but when you get it back, everyone's going to know about it. And the same thing you did is going to happen to you, but it's not going to happen in secret the way you did it. It's going to happen under the sun. It'll be in daylight, right? And you'll not be able to hide it away. Yeah, Diane.
Maybe this is a sort of simplistic question, but the early story of David and Goliath, and I remember hearing it as a child, it would have been, if somebody said, well, what would David be like when he grew up?
Right.
To me, you wouldn't expect that he grew up in the way that he did.
Really?
And what is your sense of putting together the whole life? Starting with a young David who slays Goliath, who's not only big, but, the negative figure in the.
Well,
David is doing good.
What we read in Samuel 1, the end, the middle of Samuel 1 and on, was the fact that he was becomes a very popular figure.
Right.
Who becomes a threat to King Saul.
Right.
And Saul's always trying to get him and kill him, etc. And he has this very mixed love-hate relationship. I don't think it's hate at all, but a mixed relationship with Shaul. Doesn't kill him back. He doesn't want to, because he could have. We have many stories in Samuel 1 where he had opportunity to kill Saul, and he does not. So he has in him a bit, at least early, he seems to have a capacity for restraint, which is interesting, which is counter indicated in a young person.
Right. Right. Yes.
People that have less restraint. He seems to have a lot of restraint. He also continues, of course, to have ambition. He has ambition. He would like to take over and do something that Saul was not capable of doing, and that was basically defeating the Philistines and creating a consolidated kingdom. Shaul was not able to do that. He hoped he would be, and he works his popularity. He becomes so popular that anything he wants, he can get, because people really support him. He's not tyrannical in any way, like his his son will become. I don't want to spoiler
Right.
alert. Shlomo becomes quite tyrannical. You don't hear that from David at all. So he's well liked. But what is interesting, as you will see as we move on to the readings for next week, a lot of palace intrigue is beginning to emerge, a lot of rivalries among the kids, and a lot of perhaps, I don't know, and this the text does not tell us, was it known by the palace, by the administration, that Shlomo was going to be the heir? Because since all of the Bathsheba episode happens in private, right? So because they don't know a definite heir has necessarily been appointed, there's still a sense of rivalry of who will be the heir. So that's a little crinkle that we have to pay attention to. Ed, and then who else had it? And Lydia.
Lydia, why don't you go first? You had your hand up earlier.
Oh, Ed, that's so kind. I guess one of the themes I'm struggling with is the human condition, or the human attribute. It's not really, I don't even know how to describe it. I don't want to call it a flaw because it makes us human, is jealousy. And it's a theme throughout Torah. Now it's a theme with Saul, and now again with David. So Saul gets into big trouble. He was a king, and he gets into big trouble with God because he's jealous of David in a simple form. Now David gets jealous now of Bathsheba's husband and gets rid of him. For some reason, God decides it's okay to forgive him. He wasn't so great, in my opinion, with Saul on that issue. And in going back through the Bible too, it seems like the themes of what kinds of jealousy both become very destructive and how God handles them, concept of God in this way, is very curious to me and interesting throughout. And I wanted to hear what you had to say about that. But separate to, I had one more thing that was totally unrelated. Just Moshe, one more thing, and then you'll have to put the two together. Totally unrelated before I forget. In the Purim story with Haman, the reference with Haman, who is that guy? He should be hanged. That comes long after prophets.
Yes, probably. Some people place it at 200 BCE. This story is supposed to take place in 1000 BCE. We don't know when the actual narrators, put together all of these tales and made a book out of it. We don't know. That could have taken 100 years or 200 years. But the Purim story is after, right?
Okay, thank you.
But
back to my other question.
The Purim story becomes a prototype for many, many stories. The silly king, the bad vizier, the snidely whiplash, and what's his name? Dudley Do-Right comes to save the day and save beautiful Nell, right? Esther, etc. It's a prototype, very much so. But the jealousy thing is interesting. We have two kinds of ways of understanding jealousy. There's jealousy and there's zealousness. Zeal, right? You made that for the term. Person can be zealous for something, and that something is something that he wants to or she wants to prove themselves. They're zealous that they really have the truth. But zealots think so. You know that. Like the MAGA people, they know they have truth, right? And they're zealous, and they're willing to do whatever they have to do to get their truth out. And then you have jealousy. I don't know if he was jealous of Uriah, who I think, as I say, may have had a troubled relationship with his wife, explaining why she was intimidated. If the king wants you, you don't say, well, maybe next week. Or you can't say, I have a headache. Couldn't say that to the king, right? I have a headache. So basically, was he jealous of Uriah? I'm not sure. But the idea that all of these figures, these heroic figures, have what the Greeks call, the tragic flaw. And the tragic flaw is what usually? All of you took
hubris, pride.
Hubris, self-love.
Pride, exactly.
Imagining you're better than everyone else.
Chutzpah. It's chutzpah.
Yeah.
You think you got it all, right? Etc. So there's a tragic flaw in a sense that that David has as well as others. It's there, it exhibits itself. But as I say, I think jealousy as it becomes so important because we keep talking about God in the 5 books of Moses as again 2 words: a jealous God or a zealous God. Okay, both are being used there quite a bit. Yeah, there's a sense that in our ascribing human attributes to God, which we always do, we always create God in our own image. You know that everybody has God in their own image. We saw that this is probably the most deleterious kind of character, a flaw, is jealousy, right? Certainly rabbinic teaching teaches us you should be happy with what you have, and then you are, ashir, you're rich. If you're not happy with what you have, you're never going to be ever satisfied. So yeah, jealousy is an interesting factor. It seems to be, as I say in the Torah, an attribute of God, and it's and yet we're told in the 10 sayings, do not covet. Right? So it's kind of interesting. Human beings shouldn't covet. God seems to covet a lot. He wants it all, God. He wants you to do his bidding, get rid of all the other gods, those other guys who are competing with me. I want them out of there, right? He's not very successful at it, but he wants it out of there. And he appoints these prophets to do it. Now, remember, there's no more God. In this book, it's a little bit bizarre, a little different, that David himself has, it seems, a personal relationship with God. As we saw in the first book of Samuel and into the second book, God talks to him, he talks to God. It's a very fascinating kind of thing. You don't see that very often because it's the prophet who talks for God. In both cases of the prophet Samuel and the prophet Nathan, is that they are, and this is very important because this would not be the case later when we get into the book of Kings. There is room for the prophet to speak truth to power. Later on, when King Ahab doesn't want to hear what Elijah has to say, he says, I'm going to kill you. and David and Elijah runs out of town, right? He drives them out. So this is still a time when the idea of kingship is a bit more circumscribed, and that there's still a capacity for the prophet to speak that bring God's word and be a bit of a corrective. The prophet is a bit of a corrective for going out of the lines, for going across the boundaries, for transgressing, if you will, the boundaries. And here certainly David transgressed the boundaries, and the price he pays and is it's a fascinating thing that that this child is the victim of their parents' behavior. And that's a very tough thing to take on. I agree. We have a concept of the mamzer, for instance, right? Of the mamzer, which means a person who is the product of a relationship that could not be corrected by marriage. That's important. Not a bastard, not out of wedlock. It can be out of wedlock, but if either of those parties are married, then the kid's a mamzer. But if they're both single, right, and they have a child, kid's not a mamzer, they can get married. So it's something that could be correct. So this kid pays the price for his father and mother's dalliances. And as again, we don't get a sense at all from this that there's any sense of coercion here, except the intimidation of the king saying, "Hey, sweetie, why don't you come back to the house? We'll have a drink or two." There was no drink or two either. It was just, it was right directly into that. So I make there's no way of really truly understanding David except that at this point that he could say he was wrong and accept the fact that he's going to be quote unquote punished by the loss of progeny, by the loss of continuity. Plus, with all of the other wives, he had children. That was part of how he saw his role. As you know, men have this craziness, right? They want to, spread the seed and all that. And as a king, to have this large entourage, this large family, he hoped to expand that family. See, no one had a problem with him taking another wife. That wasn't a problem. Men at that time were allowed to have as many wives as they could afford. Yes, Ed.
Well, first, a very quick comment on this discussion about jealousy. It may seem that God is so punitive towards those who have a jealous flaw that it's a projection of God's own jealousy, which is why it ticks him off so much. The question I had was, these chapters read different from earlier ones. It seems like either there was a writer's strike going on, they had a short deadline, or I mean, it's like a Cliff Notes version.
Correct.
Like Moby Dick, old guy obsessed by a large fish, spends his life hunting it. Okay, got it. There's something about this that feels like written by a different author, different circumstances, because it doesn't go in any depth. I mean, some of the early ones may be superficial, but they're nuanced.
Yeah.
And this is just kind of like, somebody threw it together and there it is. We need Samuel too.
Someone says, here are the facts, ma'am. Here are the facts.
Yeah. ...
Maybe Chat GBT did it. I don't know. It's possible. No, but I agree.
It does feel like it's of a different.
Yes.
It has a very different feeling from other parts of that we've read.
It leads me to think, and as I was reading some commentaries on this as well, some Bible critics, that the story was well known, and it didn't have to when it was put into this corpus, which took a long time. These things take a long time. Put into this corpus, which will eventually become a book, right? Everybody knew the story, so he just gave you the bullet points. Maybe that's one possibility, but you're right. It's very tell him I am pregnant. 3 words, right? I am, but the point is, I hate to use the pun, but maybe those 3 words are really pregnant with depth, because that's really, that really messes up a bit of his plan, etc. That's why he works at wanting the husband to lie with her, so he could say it was, not me, but Uriah, and it also eventually leads to Uriah's death. But I do think there are different styles, right? I do think, like the 5 books of Moshe, there were different people who came and told these stories that were put together over many centuries. But still, while it was being put together, I think in writing, these stories were always there as oral stories going around, and sometimes the stories were so good, like that stylistically deep. Like, for instance, we read the story of Joseph. What a story! You get a sense of what people are thinking. It's a very highly stylized and beautiful, structured story. 13 chapters of the book of Genesis. I assume that story was around for a long time, and it was told so well after so many years that somebody said, wow, that's the version I want to capture. That's quite possible, because I'm always interested in how these things develop, because I think many people are caught up in this more naive sense. Oh, it all came together with like somebody's filming this and writing the words underneath the subtitles. No, it took a long time. But I agree. I think there's a difference of style, and you'll hopefully let me know, Ed, if you think that's the case in the next
Sure.
to read, because it might be that it comes back to a style that we earlier. Yes, we have a few more minutes. Michael? Yes.
So the death of the son, which is only part of the punishment. We're going to see more of the punishment in the next few chapters. But I think the book is realistic in that I think one of the messages is, when you commit a grave sin like this, the consequences of it are not just visited on you, but they're visited on potentially innocent victims around you. And I'm certainly, it certainly draws a parallel to things that are going on today in the Middle East.
that hard, but okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
consequences, right? Right.
yeah. Consequences for other people. And it just, we can
Whatever
say
you do.
we can say it's unfair, and it is, but it's also the way life often works.
Yeah, as I say, I wouldn't want to draw a direct line between the death of Bathsheba and David's first child. By the way, notice he dies on the seventh day. Why is that important?
Before her bris.
Before the bris on the eighth day. He doesn't even have a name yet, so he sort of gets erased. You know what I mean? It was the eighth day he would have a name, but it's the seventh day. Even though they might delay the bris if he's ill, whatever. But the bottom line is that he doesn't have a name. The seventh, etc. Yeah, Michael, what can I say? Yeah, I think anybody who lives in community has their actions can have a lot of effect on other people. Sometimes not directly, sometimes indirectly. But you're right. I mean, anybody who lives in society, who is an active member of society. If you're a recluse somewhere in a mountain, whatever you do might not affect me. Right? It's possible. But if you're living in a society, yes, things affect each other. Again, I think it's a rather stark comparison to talk about the horrors of Gaza and what happened to David and Bathsheba. I think it's a strong one. I get it. It's on our minds every moment. It's on our minds, and we're living in a very, very tragic time, and unfortunately, we're put into a spot now that you have to be, I think, very careful of what we say. To be honest, be very careful of what we say. But on the other hand, every Jew I've spoken to, not in TBZ, at the butchery, at the Stop and Shop, whatever, everyone's in the same state, and we're talking to each other. I wouldn't necessarily talk to this person. He says, "Tough week, huh? Tough couple of weeks." And I said, "Yes, I still like, and what's the most of the reaction? Boy, they still want us all dead. They still want all the Jews dead. They're willing to march and."
That's our job.
Excuse me?
It's our job.
What?
We are the world's other.
Yes,
That's our job.
I guess so. One wonderful historian, Simon Ravidovich, called us the ever-dying people.
I think we shouldn't get too carried away with this metaphor.
I
I
agree.
think there are other ways to interpret things.
Yes, I'm sure. But I'm saying we're in a very strange state of affairs, and knowing enough about Hamas and the fact that this is the fourth war, not the first one, and that we were pulled back by a ceasefire all those other times, and we were sort of glad that I hate to use the term, but the term that they used was they mowed the lawn. You know that term?
Yeah.
Yes.
And
I
every
think
time they
probably,
mowed the lawn,
Moshe, if we want to have a discussion, I think it makes sense to have a discussion where there are different points of view, or not have the discussion.
Yeah, we
No,
have
no,
some
you're
different
right.
thoughts about this.
Tragedies are
It's a-
happening to both people.
There are. I think there are not that many different points of view, but the ones that are there are different.
Well,
You
it
know
just
what
turns out to
No,
be
there are
pretty
many
complicated.
points of view in my experience.
I mean?
What?
Complicated, of course.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
if we're going to
complicated.
get into this, it turns
No,
out
I'm
that
not
there were
getting into it.
complexities.
I'm
So
not getting into it.
Okay,
Because
that's fine.
I think it's really too. It's in a way it's a little too soon to get into it. We'll see. I mean, the problem of human behavior is very what can I say? We haven't evolved much. We still got some evolving to do, but there's still this sense of.
I would say, though, that it is touching to me also about how many people want to figure out in the dilemmas of all this what is human.
Yeah.
So I see different forces at work. When I talk to people, obviously I'm closer to left Zionism. I have very conservative relatives, and there's tremendous grieving that goes on for ourselves, but for others too. And I am touched by,
And I do think a lot of people
in the cruelest of times, a certain humanity and humanism also is there, from my experience.
I think people don't give credit to the fact that we can have more than one idea in our head at the same time.
That's well said. That's a good way to end. That's a good
Good conclusion, because it was starting to edge into some complex issues that were starting to, simplifying complex issues doesn't usually help.
I thought it was a good idea.
You and I and all of us who are connected in some way to the Jewish community are getting stuff to read every day, 2 or 3 articles. Some of them are exceptionally good, but except the people who need to read them won't. So, you know what I mean? So it's a bit of a need for ourselves to try to understand all of this, which is so painful, so painful. And again, I don't watch the Arab news as much, but I have a feeling there are different ways of seeing these things that are very stark, very stark. So I wish us all a good week, and I would say a tough week. But this Shabbat morning, if you want to have a way to get away from that for a little bit, we're having a contemplative service. It's going to be fewer words, less Torah reading, more silence, more give us a real sense of perhaps of mindfulness in the moment, and to appreciate what we have in the moment.
And how far should we read for next week?
Oh, good. Thank you for asking. Quite a bit, because we're getting towards the end.
Just to bring us back to our reality.
Chapters 13 to 19.
Okay.
And that will include the rebellion of Avshalom, which is quite an interesting story. And then we'll conclude with 4 more chapters for the 15th. So at least I've accomplished my mission, which is let's read the story. I wasn't aiming at anything really deeper than that, because I think we don't read enough of the actual text. There's no a story or two. So now we have maybe a better shape of where we can fit things into. All the best, namaste, and we should have what can I say? We need a peace. We need peace. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night,
Good
all.
everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.